I didn't expect Koreans to enjoy this little gadget as well. The salesman and Gi-hun were having a blast, completely oblivious to the stares of others in the subway station. Of course, it was clearly Gi-hun who was more excited, because every time he lost, he only had to take a slap. But every time he won, he'd get 100,000 Korean won. For someone like him who was buried in debt, it was a guaranteed win. Sure enough, after taking more than 10 slaps, he finally won once. But by that point, he had already been slapped into a frenzy and raised his hand to slap the salesman back. To his surprise, the next moment, 100,000 cash was handed to him. That's when he remembered the real reason he was playing this game. So he quickly changed his attitude and kept playing with the salesman, eventually winning a full 1,000 Korean won. Just as he was excitedly counting the cash, the salesman asked if he wanted to join him in a more lucrative game, a game where, in just a few days, he could reach the peak of his life. But Gi-hun said the salesman must have ulterior motives. If he ended up losing a few million and some spare parts, it would not be worth it. Unexpectedly, the salesman stood up and mentioned the debt on Gi-hun's bank card, which shocked Gi-hun and made him ask how he knew. The salesman didn't answer but instead handed him a business card, telling him to think it over and call the number on it. However, he needed to do it quickly, as there were limited spots in the game. As Gi-hun stared at the business card, unsure whether to trust it, he looked up again, and the salesman was already gone, leaving on the subway, which made him feel like he had just missed out on $1 billion. But after a moment's thought, he decided it didn't matter whether it was a game or not, as long as the money in his hands was real. So he immediately used the money to buy a fish, and when he got home, he personally cooked it for his mother, even giving her 500,000 Korean won as pocket money. This surprised his mother, who thought he had gone gambling again. When Gi-hun heard that, his temper flared, and he shouted that this money was earned through his hard work. However, his mother still couldn't be happy because this money wasn't even enough to cover their living expenses for half a month. The key issue was that his daughter would be going abroad with her stepfather next year. Without money, they couldn't even fight for custody, which meant it would be hard to see his granddaughter again. It was the first time Gi-hun heard of this, so the good mood he had just received quickly disappeared. That night, as he lay in bed, he thought of his huge debts and the fact that he didn't even have a stable job. Gambling was basically a guaranteed loss. Not long ago, he was forced to sign a contract to sell his body, and in a month, he might not even survive, let alone fight for custody of his daughter. So he decisively called the number on the business card, and the other party quickly arranged for him to go to a designated location to wait. Just as he got into the car that was supposed to meet him, he was knocked unconscious by an unknown gas. When he woke up, he found himself in a strange room. It was like a huge dormitory, and everyone had been changed into the same clothes. Clearly, they were all selected to participate in a money-making game. Their every move was being watched by red-clad people sitting at computers. The man in black with a mask in the center was probably the person in charge. Gi-hun couldn't believe so many people had come to participate, and was even more shocked by the host's big budget. At that moment, he suddenly noticed an old man next to him, counting the number of participants. He hurriedly reminded him that the screen in front showed there were a total of 456 participants, and the old man was the first one to arrive, number 001. Gi-hun was number 456, the last to arrive. Suddenly, a commotion broke out in the crowd as a muscular man with tattoos was beating up a woman. Gi-hun recognized the woman and immediately rushed over to push the man away. The next second, he grabbed the woman by the collar. It turned out that not long ago he had won 4 million from betting on horses. But when he turned around, this woman had stolen it. Because of that, he had been forced by his creditors to sign the contract to sell his body. So, seeing her here again, Gi-hun immediately went up to demand she pay back the money. But obviously, if she had money, she wouldn't be here. Gi-hun angrily shouted at her while holding her collar. To his surprise, the muscular man kicked him down. Just as he was about to beat him up, the dormitory doors suddenly opened. Several masked, red-clad people walked in, and the previously noisy scene instantly became silent. One of the red-clad men slowly stepped forward and told them they would participate in 6 games over the next 6 days. The final winner would receive a prize that they could never have imagined. Before he could finish, someone in the crowd raised objections, saying they couldn't trust the red-clad people. After all, they didn't even know who they were, and they had been knocked unconscious and brought here in a daze. Now, even their personal belongings had been confiscated. A man who seemed to be a high achiever wearing glasses also agreed, saying it was outright kidnapping. Unexpectedly, the next second, the big screen played a video of him playing a mini-game. The red-clad people explained that everyone here had volunteered to participate because they were all heavily in debt. But even so, some people still didn't believe they would actually receive money. Gi-hun directly asked how much the prize money was. In response, the red-clad people lowered a huge piggy bank from the ceiling. They explained that after each round, a large sum of money would be added to the bank, and the exact amount would depend on the outcome of each game. And there was absolutely no obligation to participate. They would all sign a consent form for the game, and if anyone didn't want to join, they could leave right now. However, once they signed, they couldn't quit unless more than half of the participants agreed to end the game. In that case, everyone would leave with nothing and return to their debt-ridden lives. In the end, all 456 participants signed the agreement, knowing full well what awaited them outside. Staying meant they might win the prize. Little did they know, this game was nothing like the ones they had played before. They were soon taken to a vast open field, and Gi-hun suddenly ran toward the man with glasses, who seemed to be the high achiever. It turned out they had grown up together, and the fish Gi-hun had bought earlier was from this man's mother. The man, Sang-woo, was indeed a high achiever. He was the only one in their community who had passed the Seoul University entrance exam. It was said that he later started a big company, which surprised Gi-hun to see him here. But Sang-woo seemed to have some unspoken secret and wouldn't share it. Gi-hun noticed that he was too proud to open up, so he didn't press the issue. As the man in black in the surveillance room answered a phone call, the first game officially began. When they heard that the first game was the childhood favorite, red light, green light, everyone showed a look of disdain. All they had to do was run past the red line in front of the doll within 5 minutes to clear the round. Player 324 fell to the ground, and the others seemed to realize something was wrong. But they quickly thought it might just be a sound effect to enhance the atmosphere of the game. After all, in today's society governed by law, how could a large-scale killing game happen? Player 250 walked up to player 324 and praised his acting skills. But the next second, he panicked and turned to run, only to be shot dead. Now everyone realized that people were actually being killed, and the cowardly ones immediately started running towards the entrance, only to be shot and killed without exception. When the scene finally calmed down, nearly half of the participants had been eliminated. When the game resumed, no one dared to make a move. Only player 001, the old man, calmly moved forward. Following his lead, everyone continued the game. However, Gi-hun, who had been knocked down earlier, was now completely stunned. Luckily, his childhood friend behind him reminded him that if he didn't move soon, he would die when the timer ran out. He also noticed that the doll was a detection device, and as long as he hid behind the people ahead, the chances of being detected were much lower, so Gi-hun quickly calmed himself down and continued moving forward. Although some people were eliminated along the way, it wasn't the large-scale shooting from before. Player 101 had been feeling that someone was hiding behind him. So during the still moments, he quietly asked who it was. To his surprise, it was player 67, the woman he had slapped earlier. It turned out that this woman, who had stolen his money, used to be Duk-soo's subordinate. She had been punished for her betrayal, and now as long as she moved slightly, Duk-soo might directly kill her. But she didn't do that. Instead, while running, she pulled him down, intending to make him run out of time and be eliminated. Just as Duk-soo was furious, a man ahead of them suddenly got shot. Without his shield, Duk-soo was now incredibly nervous, only for the next second to find a barely alive man grabbing his foot, clearly hoping Gi-hun would save him. But Gi-hun was too busy trying to save himself, so he decisively pulled away and kept running. Gradually, many people crossed the finish line, including Sang-woo, Il-nam, Saebyuk, and even Duk-soo. Gi-hun thought 20 seconds would be enough, but unfortunately, he stepped on a corpse. Fortunately, the guy behind him pulled him back just in time, or he would have been eliminated. The two of them, however, made it across the finish line at the last second and survived the first game. As for those who hadn't crossed the finish line, they were all shot dead, and the red light, green light game ended completely. The scene shifted to red-clad people burning the bodies of those eliminated in the first game. Meanwhile, the surviving participants returned to the dormitory, all wearing expressions of hopelessness. At that moment, several red-clad people walked in. Before anyone could ask questions, they announced the results of the first game. In just 5 minutes, 255 people had died. Even Duksu, who was usually ruthless, found it hard to accept. Suddenly a woman stood up and said she wanted to quit the game, explaining that she had a child at home with no one to look after. Seeing this, many people knelt down and begged for mercy, but the red-clad people said that everyone had signed an agreement, and anyone who quit midway would be considered eliminated, meaning quitting meant death. However, at that moment, Sang-woo suddenly spoke up about the third item in the agreement. If more than half of the participants agreed to quit, the organizers would have to terminate the game and send them back. The red-clad people didn't deny this and agreed that they would let them vote on it. But before the vote, they had to show them the current accumulated prize money. Upon hearing this, Mi-nyu, the first to want to quit, immediately became uneasy and asked the red-clad people how the prize money would be distributed if they cleared all 6 games. The answer was that the survivors would divide the total prize money in the piggy bank, and the amount was the total sum accumulated from all the participants, 456 billion won. Upon hearing this, greed appeared on everyone's faces, but the red-clad people immediately began the vote to end the game. At this point, many people changed their minds and voted in favor. Even Sang-woo, who proposed the vote, voted in favor, which surprised Gi-hun, who had voted against it. But all he could do was hope that the number of opposing votes would still be higher than the supporting ones. To his surprise, the vote ended in a tie, 100 to 100. The last person to vote was Il-nam. Fortunately, after thinking for a moment, he voted against it. This made those who voted in favor very dissatisfied, and they shouted that only those who opposed should leave, and they would stay to continue the game. But the rules were the rules. The red-clad people insisted that everyone should be sent back, but they would be invited again in a week. At that time, only those willing to return to the game could come back. Soon, everyone was sent back to the city. By chance, Gi-hun was thrown into the same area as Se-byok. He immediately helped her untie the ropes around her hands. However, after she put on her clothes, she was about to leave, clearly afraid that after Gi-hun untied her, he would ask her for money. Gi-hun promised he wouldn't, and only then did she help him untie the ropes. But once the ropes were off, Gi-hun immediately tried to ask Se-byok for money. However, before he could do anything, she threw him aside and left. After he untied the ropes, Gi-hun didn't chase after her. Instead, he rushed to the police station to report the game. But the officer didn't believe him, and the phone number on the business card didn't work, so Gi-hun reluctantly gave up. Meanwhile, Sang-woo, who had been saved by Ali, was thrown into the same area. Sang-woo was a small business owner, so he still had some credit available. But when he bought a pack of cigarettes to calm his nerves, he saw countless messages urging him to pay his debts. At that moment, he wished he had never left the game, but now it was too late. Before he left, he gave Ali some travel money. The next day, Sang-woo came to his mother's stall and secretly watched. Seeing his mother still working hard, proud of him, he felt too ashamed to approach. But the next second, Gi-hun appeared behind him, and they had coffee together. Gi-hun also learned that Sang-woo had gone into massive debt because of a failed stock investment, so if he were invited again, he would go back to the game. Gi-hun immediately tried to dissuade him, saying someone like him would definitely be able to make a comeback, but it seemed like Sang-woo had already made up his mind. Just then, Gi-hun received a call from the hospital, where he was told that his mother's diabetes had worsened due to lack of treatment. She had developed severe complications and would need to undergo amputation if not treated immediately, and the treatment cost a whopping 100 million Korean won. When his mother found out, she immediately forced her way out of the hospital. Feeling ashamed, Gi-hun went to drink his sorrows away, only to run into Il-nam from the game, who revealed that the old man had cancer, and to avoid being a burden on his family, he also planned to return to the game. Gi-hun was puzzled as to why everyone supported the deadly game. While he was lost and confused on his way home, a police officer suddenly showed up at his door, asking about the killing game. It turned out that when Gi-hun had reported the game, the thief he had caught earlier had returned to the police station. At first, the officer thought Gi-hun was crazy, but later he found the same business card at his brother's house. His brother had gone missing a week ago, and his whereabouts were still unknown, so he came to confirm the truth of the game. Gi-hun knew that those who hadn't returned were already eliminated in the first round. However, he didn't tell Junho the truth. Instead, he claimed that everything he had said before was a lie. As he was about to send Junho away and return home, he suddenly saw another invitation card slipping through the door crack. It seemed that the people behind the game had indeed sent out another invitation, just as promised. After some thought, Gi-hun decided to rejoin the game. Red-clad people dragged the unconscious Gi-hun toward the docks, unaware that Junho, who was looking for his brother, was trailing behind. Soon, he saw a large number of identical business cars, all lining up to board the ferry. He quietly hid under one of the cars and snuck aboard. When the ferry arrived at its destination, all the red-clad people got off to attend a meeting. Junho took the opportunity to pretend to be unconscious and disguised himself as a participant. However, when the red-clad people returned to check the identity information, they quickly discovered that he wasn't in the database. So, he acted decisively, knocked them out, stole their clothes, and threw the person into the sea. In the end, he successfully infiltrated the red-clad people's team by wearing the mask. The scene switched to Il-nam, who woke up again from his unconscious state, and Gi-hun, who had been waiting beside him. After greeting Gi-hun, the old man began to check the number of participants and discovered that 187 people had chosen to rejoin the game. As people gave up, the prize money accumulated to 26.9 billion, and he remarked that it seemed like everyone was going through hard times. Even Myeon-yo, who had said her child had no one to care for, was back. Of course, Sang-woo and Ali were also back, so the four of them decided to form an alliance to make it through the game. Other participants also began forming alliances, with Duk-soo's team being the largest. He first found Se-byuk and threatened to kill her in the next round of the game. Se-byuk seemed to not care at all, and at that moment, Mi-nyu suddenly approached and wanted to join Duk-soo's team, only to be ruthlessly rejected. Little did they know, these two women were no pushovers. One smuggled in a folding knife by holding her breath, and the other had hidden some cigarettes in her pants. The two of them even pretended to go to the bathroom and cooperated to crawl into the ventilation ducts to gather information about the game. Se-byuk saw a group of red-clad people boiling something, but she couldn't figure out what the next game was. Meanwhile, Junho, who had successfully infiltrated, found his own dormitory. It turned out that the red-clad people didn't know each other's identities. After their shifts, they were all locked in specific dorms. Although the treatment wasn't bad, they couldn't contact the outside world. Junho had no choice but to record all the information he had gathered on his phone. The next morning, he disguised himself as a red-clad person and went to deliver breakfast to the participants. Se-byuk looked at the bread in her hand, but didn't eat it, as she was worried it might be made from the same thing they had seen the red-clad people boiling last night. Sang-woo, who had a sharp eye, noticed and also didn't eat it. He had seen Se-byuk and Mi-nyo whispering after coming back from the bathroom. On the way to the second game, Sang-woo specifically asked Se-byuk what she had seen last night. After learning about what the red-clad people were boiling, he couldn't immediately figure out what game it could be. It wasn't until he saw some simple drawings on the wall of the game arena that he vaguely remembered the shape candies he used to eat as a child. However, he couldn't be sure how the organizers would modify the game, so he didn't tell Gi-hun and the others his guess. Soon, the announcement came, instructing participants to choose one of the 4 shapes on the wall. Gi-hun initially suggested they all choose the same shape, but Sang-woo, worried that they might all be eliminated, thought they should pick different shapes. Upon hearing this, Gi-hun immediately felt that a smart person like Sang-woo was different, so the 4 of them quickly decided. Sang-woo chose the triangle, Ali the circle, the old man the star, and Gi-hun chose the most complicated one, the umbrella. They then went to their respective groups, and Se-byuk, feeling that Sang-woo was more cautious, chose the same team as him. Each team was given a circular tin, inside which were indeed the corresponding patterns. However, when the rules of the game were announced, Gi-hun was completely stunned. Sang-woo, seeing Gi-hun's reaction after choosing the umbrella, felt mixed emotions. But soon, the announcement delivered another blow. All participants had only 10 minutes to carve out their shapes, and any damage to the shape would result in elimination. As the game began, everyone sat down quietly and started carving. Gi-hun, who had the umbrella, was especially careful, using a needle and then his hands to carve. The red-clad people surrounding them only added to the pressure. Soon, one unlucky person was shot on the spot for damaging their shape, which made the participants even more anxious. Sure enough, many people were eliminated for breaking their shapes. The entire field was filled with gunfire and chaos, but many people who had picked simpler shapes managed to pass. Among them were Sang-woo and Se-byuk, who had chosen the triangle, and Ali, who had picked the circle. Even Il-nam, who had chosen the star, made it through. Gi-hun watched as his teammates left one by one, and sweat from his nervousness dripped onto the sugar candy. It was as if they had discovered a new world, and they immediately started licking the sugar. When others saw this, many of them followed suit. Meanwhile, Mi-nyu, who had chosen the star shape, pulled a lighter out of her pants. She heated the needle and started carving the shape, which made it much easier for her. Unexpectedly, after successfully passing the round, she threw the lighter to Duksu, who had previously rejected her offer to join the team. Duksu, in turn, was able to pass the game due to this, and Gi-hun managed to successfully carve the umbrella shape just before the time was up, becoming the last lucky person to make it through. As for the other participants who didn't pass, they were all shot dead on the spot. During this, an older man tried to resist by holding a red-clad person hostage. He even forced the person to take off their mask so he could report the game to the authorities, only to find out that the red-clad person was a boy about the same age as his own son. Unable to bear it, the man ultimately chose to take his own life. However, because the boy had revealed his true face, he was shot dead by a black-clad supervisor. It seemed that in order to keep this deadly game a secret from the outside world, the organizers had already set up very strict rules. After this round, only 108 participants remained, and in just 10 minutes, 79 more were eliminated. The prize money had also accumulated to an even more enticing 34.8 billion. The red-clad people then served dinner to the participants, but Duksu and the others, still hungry, cut in line again. Including Min-yu, the 5 of them ate 2 servings, leaving 5 participants without food. When they complained to the red-clad people, they got no response. One man, angry after learning that Duksu's group ate 2 servings, approached to argue. As expected, Duksu beat him mercilessly. Unexpectedly, the man couldn't take much of a beating and quickly died from the assault. However, the organizers made no reaction, and instead they sent people to remove the man's body. The number of survivors changed, and the prize pool increased by another 100 million. At this point, everyone realized that even if a participant died outside the game, they would still be considered eliminated. So tonight was destined to be a sleepless night. As expected, when the lights went out, Duksu and the others started a random killing spree. Fortunately, Gi-hun and the others were prepared and managed to barely fend them off. But Saebyuk, who had a grudge with Duksu, was in a dire situation. Although she appeared strong, she was no match for Duksu. Fortunately, she had brought a folding knife and was able to stab Duksu, successfully breaking free. With the help of Sang-woo and others, Duksu finally had no choice but to stop. At this point, everyone in the dormitory had completely lost control and gone crazy. The organizers, who were watching everything on the monitors, didn't stop it. Suddenly, Il-nam, who had been part of their group, disappeared. The supervisor, frantically searching for him, was startled when the old man suddenly stood on the highest bed and shouted,
"I'm so scared!
We are all gonna die in here! Everyone! Every single one of us is going to die!"
Ended.
You keep this going!
Maybe the organizers were tired of the chaos, because as soon as the old man finished speaking, a group of red-clad people rushed in to stop the massacre. However, only 80 participants were left, and the prize money had increased to 37.6 billion. Duksu and the others were satisfied with this outcome, while Min-yu felt she had made the right choice in her team. To reward the injured Duksu, she even took him to the bathroom to strengthen their alliance. The next morning, all the participants were taken to another venue for the next game, and they learned from the announcement that the next round would be a team game. Participants needed to form teams of 10 to compete, and everyone thought that teaming up with men was the best choice. So, as expected, Min-yu was kicked out of Duksu's team, while Gi-hun ended up in a team with women and elderly people. Despite her best efforts to find strong men, all Gi-hun could find were weak, unwanted players. Even Saebyuk brought along an expressionless woman, and in the end, they were still one person short. Just then, Min-yu suddenly showed up uninvited, claiming that she was definitely more useful than the 2 women. Sang-woo, looking at this team of the weak and elderly, felt helpless, and when he saw that the next game was tug-of-war, his heart sank. On the other hand, Duksu, who had no qualms about anything, was excited, and his team even drew to go first. As expected, they easily eliminated the other team, sending all 10 participants home. While Sang-woo was envious, they soon found themselves drawn to the next round. Their opponents, however, were also a full team, and they walked toward the elevator nervously, being taunted by Duksu on their way. The few people entering the elevator were full of doubt, except for Il-nam, who didn't lose hope. He encouraged everyone, saying that winning tug-of-war wasn't about raw strength, but about teamwork. Although they weren't sure if the old man's words would work, they had no choice but to try anything. Following the old man's advice, Gi-hun stood at the front, as this person had to face the opponent directly. He would also serve as the leader, so they needed someone confident and not too weak to take on the role. Next, Ali, who was the strongest, took the position at the back, since they needed someone solid like an anchor to stabilize the team. Then, everyone stood in an alternating pattern, tucking the rope under their armpits. Their feet were aligned to make sure they could apply maximum force. The key was that in the first 10 seconds after the game started, they all needed to lean back as far as possible, even aiming their stomachs at the ceiling. This way, they could avoid being pulled forward. As long as they held this position for 10 seconds, the opponents, who had originally been in an advantageous position, would lose their rhythm. At that point, they could give their all to pull and win. But as the saying goes, in the face of absolute strength, any technique is useless. Sure enough, when the other team adjusted their rhythm and started pulling with all their might, the weak team quickly found themselves losing ground. The distance they had gained was slowly being pulled back. Just as things were looking bleak, Sang-woo, the smart one, had an idea. He suggested that they all take 3 steps forward together. If they could unbalance the opponents, they might have a chance. Although this method was risky, if they didn't try, they would die anyway in the end. At Sang-woo's command, everyone relaxed their grip. But the relaxation wasn't as simple as taking 3 steps. Gi-hun's foot even ended up running off the platform. Fortunately, they managed to unbalance their opponents, and Sang-woo immediately shouted a rallying cry for everyone to pull together. Unexpectedly, they easily pulled the other team off the platform. But the opponents were so heavy that they nearly got pulled down themselves. Thankfully, the guillotine came down just in time, sending the other team off. The weak and elderly team barely managed to win the tug-of-war, and soon the other 2 teams' tug-of-war matches finished as well. After this round, only 40 participants remained, and the prize money had increased to nearly the maximum of 41.6 billion. However, with fewer participants, it was even less safe to sleep at night. So Gi-hun and the others used the bed frames to form a barrier around their resting area, and even arranged for people to take turns standing guard. Though no one attempted a sneak attack, being cautious was always a good thing. The next day, they were taken to the next game location, where they saw 5 bodies hanging. It turned out that the organizers had discovered a contestant who had been colluding with a red-clad person to cheat, and planned to win all the games and split the prize money. So, the organizers displayed the bodies to prevent such incidents from happening again, leaving only 39 participants. The next game, however, would require participants to team up again, which meant that one person would inevitably end up without a partner. Given the previous tug-of-war game, everyone wanted to find a strong, muscular man to team up with. Gi-hun had planned to team up with Sang-woo, but before he could say anything, Sang-woo had already chosen Ali. Gi-hun was left in an awkward position, and by the time he thought about picking another teammate, it was too late. So, he reluctantly went outside to find a partner. Just as he was about to team up with a man, he suddenly noticed Il-nam, who was ignored, in the corner. In a moment of compassion, Gi-hun chose the elderly man with cancer. Se-byok, on the other hand, picked Ji-young, whom she had brought along. In the end, the person left without a team was Mi-nya. Feeling resentful, Mi-nya dragged Duk-soo, who had previously abandoned her, and tried to convince him to choose her, appealing to their old connection. As expected, she was quickly knocked down. In the end, she was hopelessly carried away by 2 red-clad people, while the rest of them were taken to a building similar to a childhood housing area. Their next game was the marbles game, where the teams could set their own rules. As long as they won 10 marbles from their teammate within 30 minutes, without using violence, they would win. Otherwise, they would be eliminated and shot on the spot. So, the teammates they had carefully chosen became their opponents. Everyone was dumbfounded, and one of the teams was even a married couple. With the countdown starting, all the teams had no choice but to begin the game. Since most teams had been alliances, most chose to rely on luck and played the guessing number game. Only Gi-hun and Se-byok's teams didn't start. Gi-hun couldn't play because the old man was suffering from dementia. Se-byok and Ji-young, meanwhile, chose to talk about life rather than fight each other. It turned out that Ji-young had killed her biological father. One day, after school, she returned home to find her mother dead at her father's hands. The day she was released from prison, she was invited to participate in the game. Having already lost the desire to live, she was indifferent and didn't want to compete with Se-byok, the only person who had shown her kindness. Se-byok, on the other hand, had a tragic past too. She was an illegal immigrant, and on the day she crossed the border, her father died, and her mother was arrested. Only she and her younger brother made it to Korea. She had resorted to stealing to make money to bring her mother back, and her brother was waiting for her in an orphanage. She had joined the game to get money for her family. Meanwhile, Sang-woo and Duk-soo were down to just 1 marble each. Unwilling to accept this, Sang-woo started to manipulate Ali. He told him that not every team would finish the game within 30 minutes, and that there would definitely be another round where they could team up again. As long as the two of them defeated other teams, they would both pass. Kind-hearted Ali believed him, and following his instructions, put all the marbles together. Sang-woo even kindly hung the marbles around Ali's neck and asked him to go around and observe the other team's progress. Unbeknownst to Ali, Sang-woo had secretly switched the marbles, and with 20 marbles, he easily passed the game. When Ali returned after inspecting the other teams, Sang-woo had already disappeared, and all that awaited him was the cold barrel of a red-clad person's gun. In contrast to Sang-woo's deviousness, Deok-soo chose to change the rules and played a marble hitting game instead. At first he won a fair number of marbles, but soon both of them were left with just one marble each. When it was Deok-soo's turn, he missed his shot, and all the other player had to do was score a goal to win. In a twist of fate, the opponent's marble hit a stone and veered off course, knocking Deok-soo's marble into the hole, and he miraculously reversed his fortune. At this point, there were only a few minutes left, and most of the teams had already decided their winners. Se-byok and Gi-hun finally started their game, playing to see whose marble landed closer to the wall, with a single round to decide the winner. Se-byok went first, and her shot seemed decent, but unexpectedly, Gi-hun deliberately let her win, offering her the chance to advance. Meanwhile, Gi-hun was still trying to force the old man to play a game, unaware that the old man had been pretending to be senile and had no intention of competing. Instead, he was planning to give up his chance of winning in the end. Soon, the marbles game was over. But when the winners returned to the dormitory, they were shocked to discover that Min-yu, who had been left alone, wasn't eliminated. Instead, she had been made a winner without having to play. At this point, only 17 participants remained. 3 teams had been eliminated because they hadn't finished their marbles game, and the prize money had increased to 43.9 billion. Looking at the money, no one felt the excitement they once had. After all, in the marbles game, they had all been forced to kill their own teammates. The man who personally eliminated his wife even suggested restarting the vote to end the game. Upon hearing this, Sang-woo immediately stepped forward and scolded him, calling him a coward, saying that if he gave up now, his wife would have died in vain. "If you really cared about your wife, you wouldn't be standing here now," Sang-woo added. The man had no more words to say. The organizers were relieved that the participants did not initiate a vote to stop the game. This was because the next 2 rounds were the main events, and they had even invited the organizers of an international murder game to watch. Unbeknownst to them, Jun-ho, who had secretly infiltrated, used this opportunity to sneak into the office of the leader of the black-clad people. He originally wanted to confirm whether his brother's name was on the list of participants, but to his surprise, it wasn't. Did this mean his brother wasn't participating in this game? As he doubted that his brother had disappeared because of this game, he stumbled upon his brother's name on the list from 6 years ago. But his brother had been living well these past years. If he was a survivor from that game, what did his disappearance now have to do with this current game? So, Jun-ho disguised himself as a messenger from the foreign organizers. He was determined to investigate the connection between his brother and the killing game. The next morning, when the participants opened their eyes, they saw several red-clad people bringing in a coffin. It turned out that the man who had eliminated his wife the day before had committed suicide. Before anyone could mourn, they were taken to the next game. They arrived in a room and were asked to choose a number from a mannequin to determine the order for the next game. The middle numbers were quickly snatched up, and Gi-hun hesitated as he approached the numbers at the front. But when he turned around, he saw that Sang-woo and the others had chosen the numbers at the back. In his moment of indecision, only numbers 1 and 16 remained. He quickly decided to take number 1, but another man begged him to give it to him. Gi-hun ultimately chose the last number, 16, feeling uneasy at first, but when he saw the details of the next game, he sighed with relief. It was called the Glass Bridge. Ahead of them were 2 small bridges made of glass, with each section consisting of 1 reinforced glass and 1 regular glass. The reinforced glass could support up to 2 people's weight, but the regular glass would break even if 1 person stood on it. They had to cross to the other side in 15 minutes. Falling or failing to cross would result in elimination. The man who had taken number 1 was immediately stunned. He glanced at Gi-hun, who had taken number 16, and reluctantly stepped onto the first section of the glass bridge. Fortunately, he picked the right glass, and it didn't break. However, he wasn't so lucky with the second section. The woman in second place stepped onto the second section of the bridge. Unfortunately, she chose the wrong glass on the third section, and as expected, number 3 stepped onto the third section. This man was ruthless. He charged forward, running all the way until he fell on the 7th glass. But because he ran too fast, the others didn't remember which glass he had stepped on, so they had to try each one by one. After several people fell, Sang-woo, Se-byuk, and Gi-hun finally stepped onto the glass. But at this rate, they might not make it to the other side. The others clearly realized this as well. So, people began pushing others ahead to test the glass. Eventually, Duk-soo became the first to be pushed. Naturally, he wasn't willing to sacrifice himself for the others. So he chose to wait and face death together, rather than take another step forward. The man behind him was afraid he couldn't win a fight, so he didn't dare push him, and was directly pushed down by Mi-in-yu. Now, she was ready to get revenge on those who had abandoned her. Without hesitation, she jumped onto the glass where Duk-soo was, pulling him down with her as they both fell to their deaths. After that, only 4 people were left. Fortunately, the man at the front had worked in a glass factory for 20 years. As long as there was light, he could tell which glass was reinforced. He led Sang-woo and the others across several sections of glass, but the organizers immediately turned off the lights when they noticed. Without light, he couldn't tell which glass to step on, and he stood still, unwilling to move. In fact, only one section of the glass bridge remained. As time was running out, Sang-woo decisively jumped forward and pushed the old man to test the glass. In the end, the 3 of them successfully crossed this round, and just as Gi-hun reached the other side, all the glass behind him exploded. Se-byuk was accidentally injured by a shard. At the same time, the person in charge finally realized that Junho was there, as a foreign organizer had taken notice of him. When he was taken to the funhouse, he was forced to kill the foreign man and escape, but the black-clad people knew he couldn't get far. So, they took a fast boat and tracked him down, eventually finding his oxygen tank on a nearby island. They immediately shot it to pieces. Meanwhile, the officer trying to contact the outside world realized they had found him, but the signal was too weak. Before his text could be sent, the black-clad people caught up with him. He immediately claimed that he had already called the police and aimed his gun, threatening them to surrender. The black-clad man didn't listen and shot him in the shoulder. Unexpectedly, this made the black-clad man completely calm, because he had calculated that this was the last bullet in the officer's gun based on the casualties at the base. Just as Junho was shocked, the black-clad man suddenly removed his mask, revealing that he was his brother. His brother had intended to bring him back, but Junho couldn't accept this and refused to agree. In the end, his brother helplessly raised his gun and shot his younger brother dead. The 3 survivors were treated to a lavish meal arranged by the organizers. However, after the lights went out, Gi-hun realized that Se-byuk's wound was serious, and she had clearly lost too much blood to survive. He rushed to ask the organizers for help, but after shouting for a while, the only ones who arrived were the red-clad people carrying a coffin. It turned out that Sang-woo, fearing they might team up and quit to end the game, had directly taken Se-byuk's life. Gi-hun was already furious at Sang-woo for pushing the old man to test the glass bridge earlier. Now, he was even more enraged, but just as he was about to fight Sang-woo, the red-clad people restrained him. It was clear that the organizers would not allow anyone else to die, otherwise, the next round of the game couldn't proceed. The next morning, the game was one they used to play as children. Squid Game. They had already confirmed the defending and attacking sides by tossing a coin. Sang-woo, as the defender, only needed to ensure that Gi-hun didn't enter the squid shape drawn on the ground within the time limit to win. Otherwise, Gi-hun would win. Now the game had entered its final stage, and under equal rules, both could use any means, even kill each other. The sky began to pour rain, making their struggle even more intense. Gi-hun kept getting injured, but as the main character, his willpower was incredibly strong. Even with his hand pierced, he didn't give up. His determination seemed to come from that saintly heart that couldn't stand Sang-woo's wanton killings. But what exactly was wrong with Sang-woo? After all the eliminated participants were going to die anyway. And Se-byuk, in her condition, wouldn't have survived. Why end the game and sacrifice so many people for nothing? But at that moment, Gi-hun couldn't think of that. Every punch he threw at Sang-woo was filled with fury. Eventually, he pulled out the knife in his hand, intending to kill him. At the crucial moment, however, he deliberately stabbed the knife off target. Everyone thought he was reluctant to personally kill Sang-woo, leaving it for the red-clad people to finish him. But just as he was about to stand on the top of the squid shape, he suddenly had a change of heart and decided to quit the game together with Sang-woo. That way, although neither of them would get the money, they would at least survive. Sang-woo was both moved and speechless. He then asked Gi-hun to take care of his mother before taking his own life. Thus, Gi-hun became the final winner of the game. However, even as he was about to become a millionaire, the organizers threw him aside like a dog. At that moment, Gi-hun's mind was almost blank. He instinctively entered his bank card password and withdrew 10,000 won. The next second, he saw a balance of 45.99 billion won, but it still didn't bring him any joy. On his way home, he saw Sang-woo's mother, but couldn't say a word. The most despairing part was that his own elderly mother had already passed away. A year later, the money in his bank account hadn't moved. He had become so disheveled that he looked like a homeless person. One day, he suddenly received a business card from the organizers. Following the address, he found himself in a building, only to meet Il-nam, the man who had appeared in the game. It turned out that he was the mastermind behind the killing game, bored of watching participants play, and, since he had cancer, decided to participate in the game himself. Il-nam had been rooting for Gi-hun from the beginning, but didn't expect him to be the final winner. He didn't understand why Gi-hun refused to spend the money, so he wanted to meet him one last time before he died. But Gi-hun had no intention of answering his questions. Instead, he asked why Il-nam had created such a cruel game. Il-nam replied that although the game was cruel, he had never forced anyone to participate. Even the ones who went home had all experienced life and death situations, so the old man didn't feel guilty. He also hoped that Gi-hun wouldn't feel guilty because the people who died in the game had all been prepared for it. They had joined because of their tragic circumstances, and Gi-hun was no exception. After saying this, Il-nam passed away. Gi-hun seemed to have come to a realization. Although he couldn't accept the cruelty of the game, it appeared that the money was rightfully his. The next day, he changed his hairstyle and prepared to start a new life. First, he went to the welfare center to pick up Se-byok's younger brother, handed him over to Sang-woo's mother to raise, and left a large box of cash for them. Finally, he prepared to go to America to see his daughter, who had been taken by his ex-wife. But just as he was at the subway station, he saw the salesman playing a game with someone. Gi-hun immediately dropped his luggage and ran after him, but by the time he crossed over, the salesman had already disappeared. He then snatched the business card from the game participant's hand and warned him not to participate in the game. Afterward, he planned to fly to America to visit his daughter. However, just before boarding the plane, he received a phone call that changed his mind. Gi-hun in the subway station slowly lured the salesman into joining the Squid Game. Gi-hun had originally planned to go to the United States, but after encountering the salesman, he immediately pursued him without hesitation. The man got on the subway first, and Gi-hun missed him, but he was unwilling to let go of this lead and grabbed the salesman's business card from someone else. He called the number on the card. The mysterious person on the other end of the line advised Gi-hun not to look too deep into it, and that getting on that plane would be the best choice for him. This statement made Gi-hun realize that even though the game had ended, he was still under the control of those people. This realization further strengthened Gi-hun's resolve to find out who these people really were, and bring those high and mighty individuals who treated other people's lives as entertainment and acted with impunity to justice. The next second, the mysterious person called again, telling him he would regret not boarding the plane. Gi-hun realized that his priority was to break free from the shadowy organization's surveillance over him. He locked himself in a restroom and checked his entire body, but couldn't find any listening devices or trackers. Suddenly, Gi-hun remembered that when they played the game, the staff often scanned behind their ears. Determined, he cut behind his ear and found a small capsule-like tracker. It seemed this device had been transmitting information to the organization the entire time. He flushed the capsule down the drain, marking his first step in attempting to break free from their control. Meanwhile, Jun-ho, the police officer who had been shot by his own brother and thrown off a cliff, finally regained consciousness after being in a coma. He went through a period of rehabilitation and successfully regained his health. However, because he hadn't been able to send the photos from his phone before he was shot, and because his phone was lost after being rescued by fishermen, all the evidence he had collected on the island was gone. The only thing left to prove that it wasn't a dream was the bullet wound on Jun-ho's shoulder. But a bullet alone couldn't prove anything, and without evidence, the police didn't believe his story. Jun-ho refused to admit he was lying, so he was kicked out of the criminal police and reassigned to traffic. However, his captain, who valued him highly, wanted to bring Jun-ho back to his original position as a detective. Jun-ho had become disillusioned with the police and decided that even if he had to do it alone, He would continue investigating the mysterious organization and find out what had really happened to his brother. Meanwhile, after returning to Seoul, Gi-hun focused all his efforts on investigating this shadowy organization. To find them, Gi-hun rented an old building where he spent his time hiding, watching the surveillance cameras and keeping an eye out for anyone who came by. He also used the 40 billion Korean won from his prize money to first pay off his previous debts. Then he hired loan sharks to monitor all the subway stations in Seoul in order to track down the salesman. The loan sharks were used to such tasks, but when their loans suddenly became riddled with bad debt, with borrowers disappearing without a trace, their boss started to believe Gi-hun's story. If these borrowers had participated in the deadly game to repay their loans, it would explain why they vanished without a trace. Because these people disappeared, all the debt was wiped out. To cover the losses, the loan shark boss had no choice but to work for Gi-hun, diligently searching for people. They searched for 2 years, but even after spending billions of Korean won, Gi-hun still came up empty-handed. However, Gi-hun wasn't discouraged, as it was now the same time of year when he had participated in the game. So he suggested sending more people to closely watch each subway station. Anyone who found the salesman would be rewarded with 1 billion Korean won. When the boss heard this, he was overjoyed, quickly assembling his subordinates into groups. The group that found the salesman would receive a 500 million Korean won reward, while the boss would pocket another 500 million. As time passed, Junho used his days off to head out to the island where he had been shot. Meanwhile, Gi-hun sent all the manpower he had to search for the salesman, but they came up with nothing. Gradually, even the loan shark's men began to question whether the mysterious man actually existed. Then, they suddenly heard a loud slap and looked over, only to see a man in a suit exactly like the one Gi-hun had described. This man, dressed in a suit and tie, looked extremely polished, but was playing a childish game with a passerby. Everything was just as Gi-hun had said. Gi-hun immediately ordered them to follow the salesman and rushed over. The two men quickly followed the salesman. His game was already over. He gave his companion a business card. All the people targeted by the game were in dire financial situations, and this unlucky man was no different. He was very young and had a beautiful girlfriend, but things had gotten worse. He had gotten her pregnant. Whether they married or had the baby, it required a large sum of money. Meanwhile, his girlfriend, Junhee, sat alone in the maternity ward trying to call her boyfriend. When the call wouldn't go through, she gave up. She also received a Squid Game business card and, after looking at it, seemed to make up her mind about something. After leaving the subway station, the salesman went to buy a large bag of bread and 100 scratch cards. He then went to a park to speak to some homeless people lying on benches. Almost all of them chose the lottery tickets over the bread, which could be eaten immediately. None of them won. The salesman looked at these people with contempt, crushing the prize-winning bread under his feet. To him, these people who didn't appreciate the simple joys of life were just trash, worthy of nothing but death. Meanwhile, Gi-hun received the news and immediately drove to the park. However, due to his speeding, he was pulled over by a traffic officer who happened to be Junho. When Junho saw Gi-hun, he immediately recalled that it had been Gi-hun who had called the police about the Squid Game years ago. His instinct told him that Gi-hun knew something, so he began investigating Gi-hun's background and traced his steps to his company. Gi-hun, delayed by the traffic stop, lost a step in the race. After stepping on the bread, the salesman left again. The loan shark boss, fearing he might lose him, and eager for the 1 billion Korean won reward, decided to bring along a henchman and rush to capture him. But they seriously underestimated the salesman's skills. Not only did they fail to catch him, but the salesman turned the tables and captured them instead. The salesman also enjoyed playing games and insisted on playing Russian roulette with them. As a result, the loan shark boss lost the game and was shot in the head, while the remaining henchman, horrified by his boss's brutal death, almost wet his pants. The henchman quickly told the salesman everything, and in turn, the salesman sought out Gi-hun. Gi-hun didn't hesitate. He demanded to meet the people behind the scenes, but the salesman replied that whatever needed to be said could be relayed to him. Unfortunately, Gi-hun had no respect for the salesman. To him, this guy was just a dog for the rich. People like him could never understand the feeling of playing that game. The salesman didn't like that comment. He considered Gi-hun, a gambler, to be trash. Trash that deserved to die no matter how many times it happened. His own father participated in the game, and the salesman shot him in the head without hesitation. The two of them decided to play around, taking turns pulling the trigger. The bullet didn't come out, but they both knew that after 6 turns, the bullet would inevitably appear. By the 5th turn, Gi-hun hesitated as he took the gun. The salesman smirked, but Gi-hun didn't follow the rules. He pointed the gun straight at the salesman and pulled the trigger. With just 2 more trigger pulls, the salesman would be dead. The salesman tried to lure Gi-hun by promising information about the people behind the game, but to shoot him now would mean admitting that he, Gi-hun, was nothing more than trash. Gi-hun didn't waste words. He pulled the trigger. Luck was on his side again. The gun didn't fire. The next turn, the salesman would definitely be shot in the head. The salesman's smugness faded, and Gi-hun mocked him in return, telling him that if he couldn't take it, he should stop playing by the rules. The salesman said nothing, and simply aimed the gun at himself and pulled the trigger. After the salesman's death, Gi-hun found a familiar business card on him, but this time, the card read, October 31st, midnight, HDH Club. Just as Gi-hun was feeling victorious about this new lead, police officer Jun-ho, who had been tracking his information, showed up and immediately assumed Gi-hun was the murderer. But soon, one of the loan shark's henchmen arrived and knocked Jun-ho down. Gi-hun locked Jun-ho in a bathtub, and it was then that Jun-ho confessed he had once disguised himself as a guard on the island. At the time, he had even talked to Gi-hun, asking if he had seen a person named In-ho. He had been looking for his brother, and Gi-hun remembered being asked this very question on the island. Gi-hun began to believe most of what Jun-ho said. Jun-ho explained that he didn't kill the salesman. It was the result of a failed game. The salesman, being a gambler, chose to end his life. Jun-ho had been searching for the salesman because he was one of the recruiters for the game, and as a member of the organization, finding him could lead to his superiors. Gi-hun knew that the organization behind the games had a masked leader who managed the entire operation, and he was determined to find this person. Gi-hun didn't want to kill the manager. In his view, killing the salesman or the manager wouldn't stop the game. Where there's demand, there's supply. They existed to serve the customers. Even if one manager was killed, the clients would still be there, and they could easily find another lackey to recruit poor people for the next game. Gi-hun realized that to stop this game, he had to target its source. Jun-ho agreed with this idea. He had even seen one of the clients' faces on the island. He immediately offered to team up with Gi-hun. Gi-hun had prepared extensively for his plan. He had won over 40 billion Korean won in the last game. He had already spent part of the money on firearms, and now all he needed was manpower. The loan shark's henchmen promised he could bring in mercenaries. With money and guns, they would be able to find the location of the game and storm the island to end it. The problem was that discovering the game's location was extremely difficult. It was practically impossible for an ordinary person to reach the island. The game only selected people who were so poor they had nowhere else to turn, like No-il. She was a former North Korean soldier who shot her superior and forcibly crossed the border into South Korea. There was a girl who risked everything to bring her parents from the north and join the game, but she ended up dying in it. Gi-hun had promised her before her death that he would take care of her family. So, after Gi-hun returned, he adopted the girl's brother from an orphanage and sent him to live with Sang-woo's mother, who had also died in the game. He also gave the elderly woman and child a box of money as part of the adoption fees. At the same time, he contacted an agency to help locate the girl's parents in the north. With enough money, the agency successfully found her mother. Her mother had fallen seriously ill, but with money, this was hardly a problem. No-il, like the girl, wanted enough money to bribe the agency to help her find the child she had left behind in North Korea. But since arriving in South Korea, she had struggled to find decent work and couldn't integrate into society. She could only wear a mascot costume at an amusement park every day, earning a meager wage. Then one day, a mysterious person handed her a very familiar business card. Sometimes, the desire to find lost relatives makes people desperate enough to take risks. For most people, blood relations are hard to sever, and Jun-ho couldn't let go of his missing older brother, In-ho. His mother always felt guilty about In-ho and would tear up every time she mentioned him. Jun-ho's mother, being a stepmother, wasn't very kind to her stepson, In-ho. But when Jun-ho got sick, In-ho selflessly donated one of his kidneys to his half-brother, Jun-ho. Later, In-ho's wife also fell seriously ill, but they did nothing to help her. This serious illness completely ruined In-ho's family. In order to pay for the medical expenses, he resorted to bribery and was eventually dismissed from his public office, but still couldn't save his wife's life. Just hearing his mother talk about saving things made Jun-ho upset. As time passed, Gi-hun had gathered enough mercenaries to help him. Before the mission, he knew it would be a life or death situation, so he made a special call to his daughter. Gi-hun missed his daughter day and night, but when he actually called, he didn't know what to say. When his daughter noticed there was no response on the other end, she assumed it was a scam call and hung up. Gi-hun could only compose himself and start the mission. He led his group to the bar listed on the business card. It was Halloween that day, and his henchmen, wearing masks, followed Gi-hun into the bar. Soon, Gi-hun was tapped on the shoulder by a familiar-looking Squid Game staff member who led him away. The henchman tried to follow, but was knocked out by another staff member using a taser. Jun-ho sensed something was wrong and immediately forced his way into the bar, but it was too late. Gi-hun had already been taken away. They followed the GPS to try to catch up with the car. Inside the car, Gi-hun sat alone, with a loudspeaker in front of him. The people behind the scenes still didn't want to meet with him at this point. They asked Gi-hun what he wanted to do, and he didn't hold back, directly admitting that he wanted to end the game. Outside, Jun-ho gave the command, and 2 cars full of mercenaries were ready to act and forcefully rescue Gi-hun by capturing the organizers. But the organizers had already anticipated this and had snipers stationed to shoot out their car tires. Realizing the situation was critical, Gi-hun pulled out the handgun from his pocket and aimed at the cockpit, trying to force them to stop. However, even the inner panels in the cockpit were bulletproof. At this point, he had no choice but to put down the gun and ask to be allowed to participate in the game. After all, having the winner of the last game participate again would make for a good publicity stunt and keep the clients entertained. Gi-hun boldly declared that he would show them that the world didn't operate the way they imagined. The people behind the scenes, intrigued by his words, agreed to let him participate in the game again, and with a familiar hypnotic smoke, Gi-hun passed out. Meanwhile, No-yeol arrived at a cubicle marked with the number 11 and changed into the staff uniform from the game. When she opened her eyes again, Gi-hun had already returned to the game. Everything seemed exactly the same as before. Everyone brought into the game was heavily in debt, eager to make quick money and turn their lives around. When the game staff announced that the prize money this time was a whopping 45.6 billion Korean won, everyone's eyes lit up with greed. This time, the rules had changed. The staff would allow players to vote after each round of the game. If the majority wanted to leave, they could go home and split the accumulated prize money. With this new condition, it seemed like the players had a way out. But was it really that simple? Would the players in this season truly survive and leave? Gi-hun placed all his hopes on the fake tooth, with a locator implanted inside, hoping that Jun-ho could track it down and take down the organization. Before Jun-ho arrived, Gi-hun had no choice but to go along with the game. Before the game began, everyone signed a consent form to participate. Unexpectedly, a fight broke out after only a short time. The rapper Thanos recognized a cryptocurrency promoter at the scene. Thanos had been a loyal fan of Myung-ji and had followed his advice to invest more, only to lose everything. Now, Thanos demanded Myung-ji pay him back, but Myung-ji, having lost everything too, didn't have any money to give. The two almost fought, but Thanos' friend, a nightclub bouncer, pulled him away. Gi-hun observed everything, but didn't think much of it. What worried him more was that the consent form for this game had changed compared to the last one. First, players were not allowed to exit the game on their own. Second, players who refused the game would be eliminated. And third, if more than half the players agreed, the game could be terminated. Gi-hun signed the form, bracing himself to start the game. Before the game, a photo was taken for identification, and a group of girls recognized Thanos the rapper, insisting on taking a group photo with him. After a warning, Thanos had no choice but to comply. The photo session was crowded, and there were many familiar faces. Gi-hun also ran into a friend he used to gamble with. This friend had lost everything to gambling, and his wife and children had left him. Gi-hun, out of friendship, kindly warned him to follow his instructions, but his friend didn't take it seriously. At the start, everyone didn't take the game seriously. Thanos, staying true to his rapper persona, didn't stop flirting with women for even a minute. It wasn't until they entered the familiar game arena that Gi-hun began to sense something was seriously wrong. According to the locator, Jun-ho should have arrived by now. He pulled out his fake tooth, only to realize the tracker inside it had disappeared. Meanwhile, Jun-ho had found the island, but when he got there, the tracker was inside a fisherman's bait. It seemed the game organizers had anticipated Gi-hun's little trick. As the game was about to begin, it was clear this was a deadly game. Gi-hun had no choice but to warn everyone about the game of red light, green light, telling them not to move or they would die. But almost no one believed him, thinking that Gi-hun, shouting and panicking, was just crazy. They would soon realize that it wasn't Gi-hun who was crazy, but the game itself. At first, everyone followed Gi-hun's instructions and played carefully, not moving when they were detected. The beautiful girl Thanos had been flirting with couldn't help but mock Gi-hun. Suddenly, a bee landed on the girl's neck. At first, the girl didn't notice, but Thanos had to point it out, which scared the girl so much that she jumped up. In the next moment, the girl was shot in the head, splattering Thanos with blood. An older woman, terrified by the girl's death, screamed loudly and was also shot in the head. The sight of this caused some of the more timid people to turn and run, and in the process, they knocked into others. All of them were deemed to have moved. They were quickly identified and shot by the marksman. Soon, the place was filled with the sounds of gunshots and screams. Even though Gi-hun repeatedly warned everyone, it was useless. When the music started playing again, no one dared to move. Gi-hun could only remind them that the game had a time limit, and if they didn't reach the destination in time, they would die. This time, the others finally listened to Gi-hun's instructions, but there were still many who got shot during the game. Number 444 was knocked down by someone in front of him, but the marksman intentionally shot him in the thigh. Gi-hun saw that 444 was still moving, and, unable to bear letting him die there, risked running back to help him. But on his own, he didn't have enough strength. At the crucial moment, the kind-hearted Hyun-ju helped lift up 444 from the other side. The three of them crossed the red line in the final second. They thought they were saved and let out a sigh of relief, but number 11, with a precise shot, ended their hope. At least, the game was finally over. Back in the dormitory, they held a vote on whether to leave or stay. Gi-hun tried to rally support for leaving, but those who insisted on staying attacked him. Gi-hun had no choice but to admit that he had played this game before and won, but everyone else died. And if they kept playing, they would all die. However, his plea fell on deaf ears. Greedy people only heard that he had won. The vote ended with 182 votes in favor of staying and 182 votes in favor of leaving. Only 001's vote would make the decisive difference. Under everyone's gaze, 001 walked up to the stage and, without hesitation, pressed the button to stay. Gi-hun's expression immediately became one of deep disappointment. He had never expected that, despite all his efforts to warn them about the dangers of this game, they would still choose to continue. They had seen many people die in the game, but still, because of their greed, half of them wanted to keep playing this dangerous and absurd game. Perhaps they all thought they could take everyone's life and money and leave the game victorious. They dreamed of instant wealth and, in the end, would lose their lives. What Gi-hun didn't know was that the decision to stay wasn't made by a simple vote. It was a fake vote. The 001 from the previous game was actually the game organizer himself. The 001 of this season wasn't just another player, but In-ho, Junho's older brother, who had infiltrated the game as a player to get close to Gi-hun and sabotage his plans. In-ho had intentionally gone undercover to destroy Gi-hun's plan while pretending to be a player. Gi-hun had to admit that the second game was to choose a sugar pancake, with the umbrella shape being the hardest. Unexpectedly, the old man who had insisted on staying immediately tried to control the information about the game's trick, not letting others know. He wanted everyone to blindly participate so they would all die, and the survivors would get more of the prize money. Gi-hun couldn't let the old man keep this secret. He revealed the next game's challenge because he wanted to save more people's lives. Privately, In-ho approached Gi-hun to talk, but Gi-hun was cold to him. To Gi-hun, it was that crucial vote from 001 that had kept everyone in the game. But In-ho was quick to argue that even if he hadn't voted, at least half of the people still wanted to stay and play the game. Gi-hun tried to send them away, but they didn't have enough money, so their lives wouldn't improve, and they would never thank him. Gi-hun was left speechless by In-ho's words. In-ho even accused Gi-hun of being the reason people wanted to stay, because of him, the successful player. This made Gi-hun begin to question whether his actions were truly right. Meanwhile, Dae-ho, a young man who had been eavesdropping on their conversation, jumped in and wanted to join the group. He was a Marine Corps member, and Gi-hun's friend had also served in the Marines, so the two of them immediately hit it off. Thanos wasn't idle either. He started bullying Myung-gi again, and this time it became a 2-on-1 fight. In-ho purposely stepped in to stop it. Seeing the arrogant rapper still acting up, In-ho stepped up and beat the two of them senseless, which earned him applause from everyone. Gi-hun, seeing this act of righteousness, started to change his opinion of In-ho. That evening, In-ho made another attempt to reach out to Gi-hun. He apologized, saying he shouldn't have placed the blame on Gi-hun. Then, with tears in his eyes, he began to talk about his past. His wife had fallen seriously ill and needed an organ transplant. His meager salary couldn't cover the medical costs, so he borrowed money from clients in his business. As a result, he was fired from his public office, and his wife discovered she was pregnant while gravely ill. They wanted to keep the baby but had no money. Even though he knew the money he borrowed was from people's lives, he still wanted to use it to save his wife and child. This moment of truth was In-ho's real past. the reason he had joined the game. However, what he didn't say was that his wife had already passed away. He won the game, but nothing had changed. Later, he became one of the game's organizers. Gi-hun, moved by In-ho's heartfelt story, fully trusted him. Meanwhile, No-yul, as number 11, was often tasked with finishing off players who had been severely injured but hadn't died yet. As a result, the bodies were sent to the doctor, but the organs had lost their vitality and value after being dead for so long, and the profit-driven group behind the scenes retaliated against her. The officer who had recruited No-yul was in charge of the organ trade. He ordered No-yul to comply, but she refused. When the officer had recruited her, he had told her that this job would help those without hope of survival die peacefully, without pain. But now, the officer wasn't doing that. He killed people and deliberately attacked their less vital organs, making them suffer for a while to ensure the other valuable organs stayed alive. Only after these people had suffered and their organs were harvested could they die. The officer didn't think he was doing anything wrong. Both of them couldn't convince each other, and a similar situation was happening with Junho. He couldn't find Gi-hun, and as time passed, it became more dangerous. He went back to the police station where he used to work, hoping the chief could help. But the chief didn't believe him, so they had to come up with another plan. Gi-hun on the island knew that his situation was dangerous. He had nightmares at night about playing the sugar pancake game. Everyone followed him and chose the triangle, but when they opened the box, everyone started blaming him. Gi-hun broke out in a cold sweat and sat up, realizing it was just a nightmare, which made him sigh in relief. But when the game started, he realized that although it wasn't as terrifying as in his dream, this time, the organizers had indeed changed the game. Since no one knew exactly what they would be playing, everyone was very cautious while forming teams. The women mostly had no teams, especially the pregnant woman and the elderly lady. Hyunju, in particular, had no team, while only the attractive women were invited by the clueless rappers. On Gi-hun's side, Dae-ho, who had already found a teammate who was also a former Marine, had gathered 5 people for the team. However, the pregnant woman saw that Gi-hun was a good person and begged him to let her join. Gi-hun, being a kind person, gave up on having a stronger male teammate and accepted the pregnant woman into the team. Soon after the teams were formed, the organizers announced the game's content, a total of 5 rounds, starting with a 5-person, leg-tied circle race. The 5 rounds consisted of playing the dakji game, breaking stones, catching stones, spinning a top, and kicking a shuttlecock. All tasks had to be completed, and they needed to cross the finish line within 5 minutes to succeed. Gi-hun immediately began assigning tasks. Dae-ho would catch the stones. The pregnant woman would play the dakji game. Gi-hun's friend would break the cups. Gi-hun himself would kick the shuttlecock, and In-ho would spin the top. However, when assigning tasks, In-ho accidentally revealed something. When Gi-hun was called by his full name, suspicion arose. In-ho could only explain that he had subconsciously called him that after hearing Gi-hun's friend do so, barely managing to get away with that excuse. The people who participated in the game first were nervous and inexperienced, and almost none of them passed. Watching the others fail only increased the remaining participants' anxiety and tension. But Thanos had his own trick to deal with anxiety. The cross necklace around his neck was actually a pillbox, and when he took the pills, he got high and couldn't even remember what fear felt like. Seeing him so high, his little brother couldn't resist taking a pill too. Meanwhile, No-yul, number 11, was doing her duty and shooting the injured players. The game quickly reached the halfway point, and the weakest team appeared. This team had 3 women, a transgender person, and a weakling named Young-sik. Not only did others think they would fail, but even they had no confidence in themselves. Fortunately, Hyunju seemed calm and also inspired others. The young woman responsible for playing the dakji game kept failing, so Hyunju quickly taught her a new trick, to flip the cards over before hitting them. Sure enough, the girl succeeded on her first try with the new method. Next, Young-sik failed at breaking the stone, but Hyunju came up with a clever trick, walking backward, which sped things up and saved time. When it was the old woman's turn to throw the stone, she always failed. But with her son's help, she succeeded on the first try. When it came to Sueunyo's turn to spin the top, she also kept failing, even going crazy and mumbling nonsense. Hyunju immediately slapped her twice and threatened her, saying if she dared to quit, she would kill her before the gods. Sueunyo calmed down after being slapped and managed to spin the top successfully. When it was Hyunju's turn to kick the shuttlecock, she shyly asked them not to watch her. When everyone turned their backs, she successfully kicked 5 shuttlecocks, passing the test. Gi-hun's group was placed in the last 2 teams. They made an agreement with the opposing team to pass the game together. Once they started, everything went smoothly. The pregnant woman passed the dakji game on the first try, Dae-ho passed catching stones on the first try, and even Gi-hun's friend didn't mess up, succeeding on the first try. But unexpectedly, the most reliable-looking person, In-ho, kept failing. In-ho was, of course, doing this on purpose. As an insider, if he didn't sabotage things now, when would he? When it was his turn to spin the top, he either threw it too far forward or too far back, wasting a lot of time. He made what should have been ample time into a frantic race against the clock. Before anyone could blame him, he started blaming himself, acting as if his mentality was about to break. Gi-hun quickly tried to comfort him. With Gi-hun's encouragement, In-ho finally showed mercy and managed to spin the top successfully on the first try. They barely made it to the shuttlecock round with little time left. Gi-hun succeeded with the first 4 shuttlecocks, but the last one almost slipped through his fingers. In that moment, Gi-hun and In-ho shared an amazing sense of teamwork and both stretched out their feet to catch the shuttlecock. They finally succeeded and barely avoided elimination. Meanwhile, because No-Yul always shot the bodies, the organ trafficking group on the island couldn't get usable organs. They were furious and wanted to teach No-Yul a lesson. The 3 of them fought with her, but in the end, No-Yul was overwhelmed because she couldn't take on so many people at once. Maybe not wanting to make a bigger scene, they didn't do anything serious to No-Yul, but this incident was enough to leave a lasting shadow. At this point, the second round of the game ended, and everyone could leave with 78.82 million won. Young-sik, who had brought his mother with him, promised her that he wouldn't play anymore. The elderly woman wanted Hyun-ju and the other young woman from their team to stop playing as well. They had all survived so far, and the money was enough to live for a while, so why not stay safe and sound? Gi-hun's team, including number 001, promised they would vote to leave, but when it came time for the vote, Young-sik, Hyun-ju, and Gi-hun's friend broke their promises and chose to keep playing. Myung-gi, on the other hand, chose to vote to leave because of his pregnant girlfriend. The several million won wasn't enough to pay his debts, but at least he hoped his pregnant girlfriend could leave safely and give birth to the child. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned. When the final vote came out, the majority wanted to continue playing, and the game would go on. Afterwards, Young-sik confessed to his mother that he had been gambling outside and owed over 100 million won in high-interest loans. Gi-hun's friend had a similar reason, except that Hyun-ju wasn't in debt, but she wasn't far from it. Her gender reassignment surgery wasn't complete and required a large sum of money for the operation, so she had to keep playing. If they played one more round and some people died, at least they could get over 200 million won, and then they would stop. Gi-hun's friend could only comfort Gi-hun, saying they should look on the bright side. They had become so coordinated that they would definitely win the remaining games. But Gi-hun, who had already played once, knew that the game wasn't just about teamwork, it also forced the teams to fight against each other. The painful lesson from the marble game was still fresh in his mind. That game almost forced players to kill the people they were closest to in the game. On the other hand, rapper Thanos and his little brother were very unhappy with Myung-ji's choice. After all, if Myung-gi left and went home, this amount of money wouldn't even be enough to pay off his debts. They demanded that Myung-ji stay and play until the end to repay them. Myung-ji was so angry that it made him laugh. If he could win 45.6 billion won in the end, which would mean everyone else except him was dead, why would he repay money to dead people? Myung-ji voted to go home because he wanted his pregnant girlfriend to leave. Now, his pregnant girlfriend was completely disappointed in him. She refused to fight alongside him and instead was well taken care of by Gi-hun's team. Everyone voluntarily gave her their milk and bread so she could eat more. At night, because Gi-hun had experience from the previous game and feared they might be attacked, he specially set up a defense circle using the iron bed frame. He arranged for people to take turns standing guard. While he was on guard, his friend kept him company and chatted with him. Gi-hun, who had been worried and upset, couldn't help but smile a little as his friend brought up memories from the past. They all missed the days of living together normally. The word friend isn't so simple, especially in such an environment. Thanos, who had taken a liking to a beautiful girl named Se-mi, had always been very considerate of another boy, Min-soo, who seemed shy and introverted. Min-soo was curious why Se-mi was so nice to him. Se-mi's answer was simple. She thought Min-soo wouldn't hurt her. That night, nothing unusual happened. The next day, the new game started. This time, the game was simple. Everyone had to stand on a rotating platform, and when the music stopped, find a teammate. The number of teammates could be 3, 2, or 10. Within a limited time, they had to enter a room nearby. Those left without a teammate would be killed by the staff. The first round required 10 people. Gi-hun's group had 5, and they quickly grabbed Hyun-ju's group, making up 10 people. The second round required 4 people. Most players had formed 5-person teams, which meant they had to kick one person out. Rapper Thanos kicked his fan out of the team, and Hyun-ju's group left Sun-yo behind. Gi-hun wanted to leave on his own, but In-ho also said he would leave. Fortunately, both Sun-yo and In-ho survived. However, Sun-nyo now harbored resentment towards Hyun-ju's group of 4. The third round required only 3 people, meaning they had to kick out one person again. This time, Hyun-ju wasn't planning to kick anyone out. She took a young girl and left, asking Young-sik and his mother to find another person. Thanos suggested they play rock, paper, scissors, but Saemi wanted to leave with Min-soo. However, the shy and weak Min-soo, who had always been cared for by Saemi, unexpectedly made a scissors gesture when Saemi extended her hand toward him. This not only rejected Saemi's offer to take him, but also kicked Saemi out of their small group of 4. Normally, Thanos would want to keep the beautiful Saemi, and since Min-soo had no connection to him, he would be the first to be kicked out. Saemi didn't want to kick out Min-soo, which is why she suggested taking him with her to find another person. But she never expected the person she had cared for so much would betray her at such a crucial moment. On the other side, the elderly woman and Young-sik couldn't find a third person in time. 2 men rushed over and pulled Young-sik away. Mother and son were separated, and the elderly woman stood there, realizing she had been abandoned. Fortunately, Gi-hun and In-ho rushed over and pulled the elderly woman away. The 3 of them survived. After leaving the room, Saemi completely ignored the Min-soo, but the elderly lady still accepted her son as if nothing had happened. Then there were 6 of them, and they all had to gather again and then split up. But at the last moment, they found that the room they entered already had another group. Hyun-ju had to find another room. During this process, the young girl fell behind and didn't catch up with them. Seeing that time was running out, Hyun-ju wanted to rush out to save the girl, but Myung-gi suddenly dashed forward and locked the door. Hyun-ju collapsed. She wanted to blame Myung-ji, but Myung-ji didn't think he had done anything wrong. The final round was 2 people, and the conditions weren't difficult. It was just a race to grab a room, since there were still 126 people left. If they were a bit too slow, they wouldn't get a room. In a life-or-death moment, Thanos didn't hesitate to abandon Min-soo. Fortunately, Min-soo found another person. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. In-ho took Gi-hun's friend, but he didn't expect the room to already have someone inside. Seeing that the other person wouldn't leave, In-ho went ahead and killed him in the room. Gi-hun's friend was stunned when he saw this, but he didn't know what to say to blame In-ho. At the end of this game, only 100 players were left. Before number 001 could decide to go home or stay, there was only a 1-vote difference. In-ho, as 001, had the crucial vote. If he voted to stay, everyone would have to stay. If he voted to leave, it would be a tie. Gi-hun's friend was very worried that In-ho would vote to stay again, but this time In-ho surprisingly voted to go home, maybe because it would make for better show drama. The 50-50 vote resulted in a tie, and they got another chance to vote, but the voting time would be tomorrow. Meanwhile, Police Officer Jun-ho and his team were still on a boat searching for people. They passed an island and used drones to survey the area, finding what looked like an underground tunnel door on the island. When they approached to open the door, however, they triggered a bomb. It turned out this was a trap, and one of their team died while another was injured. But the remaining people insisted on not going back to shore. They wanted to continue searching to avenge their fallen comrades. Jun-ho had no choice but to order that the radio communication channels be changed every day, and phones were banned. At this point, only 100 players remained in the game. Both factions, those who wanted to stay and those who wanted to go home, tried to persuade the opposing side to agree with them. As long as they got one more vote, they would win. At first, it was a matter of persuasion, but it didn't work well and only fueled the anger on both sides. What worried Gi-hun even more was that tonight's dinner was actually kimbap, seaweed rice rolls. The food wasn't the issue. The issue was the metal forks handed out along with the meal, which were essentially weapons. The organizers' intention was clear. At such a dangerous, tense moment, they were providing the players with deadly tools. Thanos, that fool, once again blocked people in the bathroom, and this time he was targeting Min-soo. Since Min-soo chose to go home, Myung-gi couldn't stand it and stepped in to stop him. Thanos, then, decided to deal with both of them. This time, Myung-gi had learned from experience. If he was beaten alone, no one would intervene. But if Thanos wanted to target not just him, but those who wanted to go home, the whole group would fight back. The other side used this tactic to sway votes, and immediately they confronted Thanos. Thanos, not backing down, called for those who wanted to stay to join him. The two sides exchanged harsh words in the bathroom. At this point, Thanos knew that Myung-gi and Jun-hee had some issues. His worst threat was to cut off Myung-gi's fingers and give them to Jun-hee as a token, hoping to make Jun-hee his girlfriend. Myung-gi immediately fought back, but Min-soo, the cause of the chaos, once again managed to slip away. Seeing he was about to be choked to death, Myung-gi grabbed the fork and stabbed it deeply into Thanos' neck. Meanwhile, not far off the island, a small boat floated in the sea. Gi-hun was still trying to locate the island where the Squid Game was being held. That night, the others had become complacent. They even started drinking on the boat. One drunken crew member woke up in the middle of the night and went outside to vomit. To his surprise, he found the captain secretly tampering with their drones. This instantly sobered him up and made him alert. When the captain saw he couldn't fool him, he killed the crew member and pushed him into the sea. Although the noise was heard by his little brother, the younger man was easily deceived. It was clear the captain's identity was not simple. It seemed that his rescuing Gi-hun when he fell into the water wasn't a coincidence. He was probably working for In-ho, which explained why he followed In-ho's orders to save his brother. These years, he had purposely been taking Gi-hun around in circles on the sea. There were traitors on the boat, just as there were on the island. To make matters worse, after the bathroom brawl, the Stay faction lost 3 people, while the Go Home faction lost only 2. Tomorrow's vote would undoubtedly favor those who wanted to go home. Now, the ones who still wanted to stay were all people who valued money over their lives. They had decided to attack the Go Home group that night to ensure they won the next vote. In-ho suggested that Gi-hun make the first move, but Gi-hun didn't agree with this infighting. He believed that the real target shouldn't be the other players, but the organizers and staff of the game. If they could capture the masked game organizer, they could stop the game and win the round once and for all. What Gi-hun didn't know was that the person he was trying to catch was sitting right in front of him. He was waiting for the best moment to act, but the time to seize the organizer was right then and there. In-ho coldly watched Gi-hun and laid out his rebellion plan. He called on those who were willing to follow him to hide after lights out and not participate in the battle. When the fight was over, the staff would come in to clean up the bodies. The staff often wouldn't be wary of the bodies lying on the ground, so they could pretend to be corpses and steal the guns from the staff. As expected, that night, those who wanted to stay playing the game launched an attack on the Go Home faction.
Many players get killed or injured. After all, they still need us strong enough to play the next game.
Thanos' little brother had been annoyed by Sei-mi for a long time, and this was the perfect opportunity for him to take revenge. Min-soo, who had seen it all, didn't dare to get out of bed to help. He could only throw a soda bottle. In doing so, he handed the men a handy weapon. He cowardly stayed in bed, watching Sei-mi get killed by the men using a broken bottle. Gi-hun, witnessing it all, felt a sense of pity. Everything went according to their plan, and shortly after the chaos, the management intervened to ensure enough players remained to continue the game. Taking advantage of the situation, they pretended to be dead bodies and seized the staff's guns. They killed most of the staff who entered the dormitory and captured one alive. However, one man, in his anger, didn't just want to kill the staff. He also wanted to kill those who were willing to risk their lives to keep playing the game. Gi-hun's action helped unite a few people, and he tried to recruit more to his cause. When no one responded, Gi-hun's friend stood up and said that he was also scared, but if they didn't stand up now, they might not get another chance to go home together. After he spoke, many people stood up. They counted the guns they had taken and boldly marched toward the control room. But just a little way out, they encountered the first wave of attacks. They easily won the first round, and then seized some additional ammo. The young man leading the group tried to pull out the mask that would allow them to enter the control room, but he was shot in the head by a sniper from above. It was clear that the game organizers were afraid of them entering the control room, and the other side had a clear advantage in firepower. Gi-hun suggested that he and his friends follow the route given by the young man earlier to scout the area and confirm if they could enter the control room. Following the route, they indeed found the control room. Gi-hun and his friends dealt with a few staff members, but their ammo was running low. He immediately sent a message to In-ho, but there wasn't much ammo left with him either. Gi-hun's friend reminded them that the bodies should have spare magazines in their pockets. They could just take those. All they needed was one person to go back and get the extra magazines. So Dae-ho immediately volunteered to go. However, when Dae-ho returned to the dormitory, he couldn't bring himself to leave. After all, outside there was gunfire and bullets flying, but inside the dormitory, it was safe. As time passed without Gi-hun's leadership and without any new ammunition, the few who remained on the outskirts ran out of bullets and were completely surrounded by the organization's people. One of them, refusing to surrender, decided to use his last bullet to commit suicide. The others, who wanted to surrender, found that the opposing side didn't accept their surrender. They were each shot in the head. The situation up above wasn't any better. In-ho led his team to support them. Gi-hun took out one of his remaining magazines and handed it to In-ho. In-ho made an excuse, saying he would take a detour to deal with the people blocking the way, and then coordinate with Chung Chi-shun to surround them. But when they actually made it around, In-ho shot 2 other people from behind with a black gun. Then, he picked up the radio and pretended that they had been killed by the organization. In the end, In-ho even used Gi-hun's bullets to resupply his teammates. Gi-hun and his friends had run out of ammo and were helpless. In-ho, now restored to his position as a manager, wore the mask and, right in front of Gi-hun, shot a few people. But in the end, he didn't kill him.